Read every one of them verbatim with you, but I just want to go over, I was asked to go over kind of how the city uses TIF. So I gave this, oh, no, I'm good. I'm good because I will need to refer to this in my own brain. Oh, it's okay. So I had given this presentation to a group of realtors that Alyssa had attended, and I've since given this presentation at an economic development conference, and I've been asked by 3 other communities like yourselves to present about TIF there and how the city uses TIF. So the city was an early adopter in TIF back in the 80s, right when the law became in effect, sometime around 86 or 87. The city was an early adopter, got on board, and adopted its first TIF, which expires this year. So we've had TIF for the greater part of 35 years now in Marion. And Mayor Butler at the time, who was only about halfway through his tenure at Marion, really saw around the corner on how TIF would help Marion develop. You guys share a lot of similar characteristics that we did at that time, mainly the interstate. He saw the benefit of the interstate and the traffic that was created as a result of that, and really it's hard to say that any one thing could be credited for at least the development west of the interstate in Marion, but if there was any one thing, I would personally say it's TIF. I've been with the city about going on 5 years now. TIF wasn't something that I knew a lot about until I started, and I'm now the city's TIF administrator, so I deal with TIF usually about half of my day in one form or another. So since we've been there, knowing that TIF 1's going to expire, TIF 1 appropriately named given that it was the first TIF put in place, there is still some areas, even in that 35-year overlay district, that haven't developed. And so trying to look around that corner, as Mayor Butler was so good at, trying to understand what the next 35 years of development are going to look like, I've started looking at new TIFs that we can put into place. Currently we have, I think, 17 TIFs in the city of Marion, so it's nothing that we shy away from. At times it was met with some resistance from a couple of the taxing bodies, but generally speaking, I think that's more about using it judiciously and using it smartly. And if you're a community that chooses to go down that road and you commit to using it for purposes that are going to help all of your citizens, you can really overcome some of those taxing bodies' issues with what you're trying to accomplish, and I'll get into that a little bit later. So what is TIF? Basic question, right? So the best way to explain TIF is the T in TIF stands for tax. So that's the tax assessment on a property. So in Illinois, a property is assessed at 1/3 of its value. So if you have a home that's a $100,000 home, that's the market value for that home. In Illinois, it's assessed for $33,000. Why that third factor comes into play, I don't know. That's not a decision that's made locally, but that's a decision that's made at the state level. So if you get a tax bill and it says your assessment's $33,000, it's really 3 times that is what the county sees your property is worth. So when you put a TIF into place, you're betting on that assessed value to increase. Okay, so whether that's $33,000, $50,000, or $100,000, that increment or that increase is where the I of TIF comes into place. That's increment. So that's the change in the assessed value when the TIF was put in, and the assessed value in years 1 through 23 of the TIF being in place. That I, that increment, is what the city deposits into a special fund. It's got to be a set-aside fund. That money can't go into the general fund of the city. But that increment is what goes into the fund, so that's the difference in tax collected from year to year. Okay, so trying to think of a practical example. So if you've got a piece of an empty acre lot in town and it's assessed value is, let's say, $1,000. So full market value would be $3,000 in that scenario, right? So I don't know what your tax rate is in Johnston City. In Marion, it's 7.25. So on a $1,000 piece of property, you're looking at a tax bill of probably, let's just say $75. So I buy that acre myself and I build $100,000 house on it. That assessment is then going to go from $1,000 to $33,000, right? Because it's assessed at a third. Perfect world, obviously we don't know what the assessor is going to do on any given year, but just working in a blanket scenario like this. So you're going to increase the assessment on that property by $20,000 or $32,000, right? So the difference in tax collected on that, I'm going to bring out my calculator here so I'm not telling you wrong. Is $2,200 in that scenario, okay? So that's the difference in what the empty lot was taxed at, $75, and the new tax bill after the $100,000 home's built on it is $2,200 difference in taxes. That $2,200 under that scenario, if TIF is in place, gets deposited into the city's account, and that money can be used for a lot of things at that point, okay? They all have to be generally development and purpose, but you could also share a piece of that with the developer of that house, with the builder of that house, to encourage them to do so. And if they're going to do it anyway, don't offer up any of that money. That's the city's money to spend at that point. But that's how you can really start incentivizing developers to come in, because you know in that scenario, if they build a new house, or I came in off the interstate past the Dollar General, if they build a Dollar General in town where two old houses used to sit, they're going to generate some significant new tax, right? So capture that tax, and then you can use that for the city's purposes. That could be anything. Could be new water lines, new sidewalks, street improvements, new sewer lines, just about anything. And so when it comes down to it, the last piece, the F, is the financing part of that, and that's where the city can benefit or the developer can benefit. So in that scenario that I told you about earlier, $2,200 difference in taxes. So the city's going to get 100% of that for the next 23 years if that happened in year one. TIF lasts 23 years. Can be extended an additional 12 years. That's where the city's 35-year TIF district comes into play that's expiring this year. But in that scenario, the city's going to capture $2,200 for 23 years plus any natural growth that happens as, I don't know if your taxes go up every year, mine seems to, so you're going to capture all that new growth as well every year when your taxes go up. So with that money, the city can finance or bond, which is a government term, right? We don't get loans necessarily, we bond money. You can bond money to make a whole slew of improvements at once and pay for it over the next 23 years using your tax increment. And so the developer could do the same. So say in that scenario, of that $2,200 in new revenue that you were going to get every year, say you share half of that with the developer. So they're going to get $1,100 a year over the next 23 years. The developer can only apply what you give them to offset their eligible project costs on a project like that. So on a new home, it's pretty limited. TIF doesn't allow for vertical construction costs. So anything to deal with new vertical construction, TIF costs cannot be applied to. TIF reimbursements can't be applied to. But it can be applied to land acquisition, demolition of anything. Could be trees, could be existing structures, any utility extensions, TIF reimbursements can be applied to. If it's an industry, job training, 30% of any mortgage interest are all TIF eligible expenses, okay? So a developer can look at an agreement like that you're going to give them $1,100 back on over the course of 20 years or 23 years. They can then take that to their bank, and that document, that agreement that they have with the city can serve as collateral. So they could say, you know, rough math, this agreement's worth $25,000 over the next 20 years. What can I borrow against that? Or can that be one of the missing pieces in my financing to get this project done, or whatever it may be. So that's what the F in TIF stands for, financing. So the city can bond against future TIF revenue. The developer can use that as a piece of collateral to take it to a bank and hopefully get their financing worked out as collateral. They can then assign that check every year. So when the city cuts that $1,100 check once a year in that scenario, they can cut that directly to the bank, the developer, whatever that agreement looks like. Be pretty flexible on that stuff. Questions so far?
They can sort of use that to compound it, right? You know what I mean?
To do what?
Well, say you build a new home.
Yeah.
You got your TIF money back, you added a garage.
Yeah,
Well, then the taxes, so
Yeah.
sort of you can
absolutely.
compound, the city can and the developer.
You can, but from the city's perspective, be careful of doing that, because if they were putting in the garage anyway,
Yeah.
why are you giving them any money back? Take that yourself.
Yeah.
Use that for new sidewalks. Use that for things that will maybe encourage another developer to do a project that wasn't just an add-on or wasn't just.
So is the city limited on where they can spend that TIF money? You said the contractor.
Within the TIF district.
I know, but the contractor can't spend it for building up things,
Yeah.
but you say the city could spend it for like putting in things
Absolutely.
anywhere in that district?
Absolutely.
Wouldn't have to be necessarily on that
Correct,
property?
yeah, you could have, somebody could build a 5-story building on this piece, and you could spend that money across the tracks as long as that was in your same TIF district. That said, if you have more than one TIF district, you can move money to one TIF district, can't move it to two. So like we have 17, I can't move money from the southeast portion of town to the northwest portion of town, but I can move it to the next TIF district over. And
One
also,
that joins it?
yeah, they have to touch.
And how large is an area of TIF when you do it?
It's in the eyes of the beholder, however big you want to make it.
Keith, if I remember right, how big is our TIF district here in town? I'm trying to remember how that big it was.
We put in what we called a residential TIF in 2020, 3,000 parcels. Per capita, it made up about 30% of our town. And I'll get into why we did that. But you could, I didn't know you already had a TIF district. You can,
It's a small area.
you could technically put one in to cover the entire town if you wanted to.
Well,
That was a big
I
question.
think there was a question before that they was gonna try to do that, but I
Yeah.
didn't see it.
There's a couple qualifiers to that. I'm not just saying it's fully blanket, and
I can see one.
well, it has to qualify. And a couple of the qualifying factors are, if it's been undermined, the property's been undermined, and I assume most of Johnston City has, automatically qualifies for TIF. You don't need any other reason to qualify for TIF. Another potential scenario that could qualify a TIF district would be if the age of the home is 35 years or older. Doesn't matter if you redid the whole house last year. If it was built more than 35 years ago, automatically qualifies for TIF, which is probably most of your town, right? And only a majority of those properties have to qualify. So even if you've got a newer subdivision that was put in 30 years ago, you could still qualify it based on the majority of the town or majority of however you work that out. So,
But if the TIF district is already here,
Yeah.
it has to stay in place, you can't TIF
correct,
over it.
correct,
You
correct.
could butt up against it.
Yeah,
but
you can
not
surround it.
Surround it.
Yeah, but you couldn't.
So we could use our existing TIF district to take in the rest of town if we just made it one TIF.
You could, how long has it been here?
It's been here since 17 years.
Don't do it.
That's first business.
Don't do it, put in a new one.
Put a new one in.
Yeah, because you've only got 6 years left in it unless you extend it, in which case you only have 18.
Right.
If you put in a new one, you're picking up another 5 on top of that 18. Just put in a new one.
So could we include the old one in the new?
No, but if you waited 6 years, you could.
Oh, okay.
But if it butts,
Yeah.
Well, I was gonna say,
Yeah.
I don't think it only does the west part of town, Darren, from your area
I think it does.
to over the interstate.
Around
It doesn't
The other
cover very
side.
much area.
Okay.
the other side of the interstate.
I think it does Broadway, Grand.
I don't think it covers all of Broadway. I think it only covers just a little bit past Darren's business and west of the interstate.
How does this one?
I don't think it came all the way this direction.
Yeah.
Oh, you're good.
Yeah.
You're good. No, you're fine. So there's really two ways to use TIF, and I already talked about it. You can bond against future tax revenue. I can't think of a scenario in town where we've given up money on the front end in anticipation of what something may do. We do what's most commonly known as pay-as-you-go. So in that scenario, with the house and you know, the developer was gonna get 1,100, the city was gonna get 2,200 total, they were gonna give up half of that. There's some towns that will go ahead and pay that full amount over the next 20 years upfront to the developer, and then they don't have to worry about it anymore. We don't do that, we just do a pay-as-you-go type of thing. Every year we earn, every year we pay developers, every year we pay ourselves, depending on what it is. And I only spend money in TIF districts that we have. I don't get bonds for a 10-year sewer project. That said, not opposed to it, we just never had to do it that way. Like this year, for example, we had a $2 million street overlay program. About half the streets were in one TIF or another in the city of Marion. I pieced those together and came up with $1 million in TIF money to do our street overlay program. So we ended up paving $2 million worth of streets this year. Didn't have to borrow any money to do that.
It'd be nice to have paved streets. Instead of ownership.
Motor fuel tax, you need more gas stations. That's how you get there. So we passed a motor fuel tax, tied it to only street overlay, and that money gets set aside every year, every gallon of gas bought in Marion.
So that way we do
We
have
have
motor
motor
fuel
fuel
tax.
tax.
Yeah.
But what all we get is oil and chip.
Well, we did $2 million worth of streets and that didn't pay for very many streets.
You
That's
gotta
the
remember, we
problem.
only have a couple gas stations
Yeah.
in Johnston City, not like Marion
I know,
has.
I know.
I think that's still significant though, isn't
Right, they pay a lot of tax.
it?
Yeah.
I think we-
So, again, you can pay as you go, that's one method, that's less riskier, or you can do the TIF anticipation bonds. Or, again, the developer can finance that, just rely on your money every year to pay it back. So, I talked a little bit about the, what types of costs are eligible. So you've got development costs associated with professional fees. I don't know what kind of building codes or engineering plans that may need to be submitted when somebody builds something here, but those costs could all be TIF eligible. So if you require a developer to hire an engineer to study the stormwater when they put in a new gas station or whatever it may be, those costs are all eligible to be reimbursed through TIF. Cost of marketing aside, so if you're gonna pay a realtor their fee, if the property sells, if you're marketing, can actually be paid through TIF. Property assembly costs is how the statute words it, but that's essentially property acquisition. So either purchase or lease payments of a property are all TIF eligible to be reimbursed. Any cost of rehab, and so this is where to your point, adding a garage onto a structure or adding something onto a structure really comes in handy. So if you can consider it a rehab project rather than a new construction, 100% of the vertical construction costs are covered on a rehab, or which is an addition as well, that's considered a rehab. But if it's a new standalone construction, none of the vertical costs are covered.
So we're better off rehab.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And that's what we need.
I'll get into an example of that. That's worked really well for us. Cost of construction of public works or improvements. So, again, if you've got somebody coming into town and they need a 300-foot sewer extension, they should pay for it, and you can pay them back through TIF. Cost of eliminating and removing contaminants. So if you've got a brownfield site that an old gas station was on and somebody needs to dig up the barrels to develop the site, those costs are covered as well. Cost of job training, and that would only be on a commercial type thing. Financing costs, so 30% of any kind of borrowed money interest. So if you've got a private company coming in and they're putting they borrowed $1 million to do a project, 30% of their mortgage interest over the life of that project is TIF eligible to be reimbursed. And then any of the capital costs that the city may undertake to put the TIF district in. So in that example, we hire an attorney firm to do most of the TIF stuff. I've got the title of TIF administrator. I really just interact with developers and figure out how the city's gonna spend its money. The attorney firm does all the hard work. So anytime you've got somebody doing a project in town, they typically have a ton of receipts. So if I'm doing the work myself, I'm gonna have a ton of receipts from Menards and Home Depot and whatever else I might have, right? They verify those costs for me. And then they file a report for us that's necessary annually, it's required annually through the state comptroller on everything that the city output in TIF, and all the increment and those sort of things that were created internally. So, again, they do all the hard work, and then we pay them out of each TIF district's increment every year. So we don't, and it's free every time I pick up the phone and call. So anytime I have a question, I pick up the phone, and like a normal attorney, we don't get a bill for $125 for a half-hour phone call. It's all included in their management costs of each of the TIFs. So any given TIF, some of our smaller TIFs, we pay them anywhere between, say, $2,000 and $3,000 a year. Our bigger TIFs, we probably pay them $10,000 a year for. Sounds like a lot of crazy money, but it's because they're generating that much money, and it's worth it because they're attorneys, right? If you hired an outside attorney to do that work, especially that didn't have any knowledge of TIF, I can't imagine what you would be paying them on an annual basis. So they do all the heavy lifting, and really take us a burden off my mind. And then the last two there are relocation costs. I have never found a scenario where that's been applicable or asked for by a developer. And then I'm on slide 6, if that helps at all. And then up to 50% of cost of construction of low income and very low income new housing. So that's a scenario that we're working on right now. So the only time that vertical construction costs apply in TIF is when you've got a low income housing development going in, either owner occupied or for lease. So if you're needing housing in town and it needs to be low income and it's a private party doing it, you can incentivize them up to 50% of their development costs to put in a low income project. There's every year IDA, Illinois Housing Development Authority, offers tax credits up to developers to put in low income projects. A couple of examples in Marion are in behind Iconda, brand new, part of it's brand new. That's a low income housing development. They get federal tax credits that they then turn around and sell to big banks. Bank of America, Chase Bank, US Bank buy these tax credits to offset their tax burden. It's a weird system. I don't understand it myself, but these guys do, and if any of them ever come knocking, wanting to put a development in town, it's worth the due diligence of hearing them out, because that project in Marion that just went in, I want to say was 65 units. It was full in 3 days, and there's a 200-person waiting today. And the max rent for a 3-bedroom is $500 a month. I think the cheapest rent has utilities included. The cheapest rent's $250, I think. Yeah.
So seniors would fall underneath that too, like you get
Yeah.
senior housing?
Yeah, correct. Yeah. Absolutely.
So does the developer get ongoing money for that
Well,
property?
there's a little
Tax
give and
credit?
take to that. So if it's farmland and there's virtually no land value, they only get tax credits once, if that was what your question was. How it applies to TIF is low-income developments are assessed at a different rate than your house would be from the assessor. So that entire project out there is probably only going to generate, if it was non-low income, I would say it'll generate $200,000 a year in property tax. As it is, it'll probably generate $30,000 in property tax. So it's it's assessed at a much different rate, but still, they could get $15,000 back a year, help sweeten the pot a little bit. So, we've got an area in town that, is effectively.
Are those rental units?
Yeah, they're all rentals, and the tax credit program through IDA requires them to be rentals for 20 years.
Are they duplexes or what?
They are duplexes,
They
yeah.
are duplexes.
Yeah. They don't have to be,
Huh?
they don't have to be. The ones in town are, yeah. Yeah, they're, kind of across from the airport area. But we've got an area in town that was, it was built as housing for, what's now General Dynamics during the war. Those houses weren't built to last 80 years, and a lot of them were still standing. The city went in and acquired a lot of them, tore them down, and we're trying to leverage TIF, enterprise zone, and these tax credits, put a single-family home development in there. Low income. It's adjacent to a park, so that gets rid of some people that we may not want living there to keep crime down, and it's adjacent to a school. So it's got the potential of making a really nice neighborhood. It's just about trying to stack these incentives to make the pot as sweet as possible.
That's all those homes in that area?
What?
City's bought all those homes in that
Yeah.
area? We're talking Concord,
Yep.
Lexington?
Yep, yep, we own all those. So there's two applications to TIF, commercial and residential. But I'll put it this way, all TIF is created equal. So you put a TIF in an area, there's no reason to only include commercial properties and or residential properties. Make it all inclusive. You can't necessarily change the way, or what the incentive is in a TIF. That's completely up to the city what the incentive is in a TIF. We typically do, anytime we're incentivizing a developer, we typically give them 60% of the increment, and we keep 40% of the increment. If it's a big job creator, we may go 80-20. If it's somebody that doesn't know about TIF, we might go 40-60. Not to be untruthful or anything like that, but I've actually had companies say, no, we don't want any incentive, we don't want anything to do with anything. FedEx is a unique example. That building was built and held by a different company than FedEx, and they're a lessee. FedEx wants no incentive to be a Marion, so the leaseholder does. And so we're like, well, you know, we typically start out at 40-60, and they're like, oh, okay, that sounds good. Thinking that it was the other way, but we ended up retaining 60%, they kept 40%. So with that project alone, we anticipate, I think that'll generate probably $250,000 a year by itself, at 500,000 square foot facility. With that $250,000 a year, I'm gonna offer grants, I'm gonna replace sidewalks, I'm gonna do all kinds of stuff with that money in the neighborhood that project's connected to, which is the second oldest neighborhood in Marion, and I'll get in that for a second, but don't confuse TIF that it has to be all commercial or all residential. In my opinion, it works best when it covers both. So, I guess we look at TIF kind of like we have three goals. The first is to incentivize developers to get them to develop in Marion. TIF is created on the assumption that, but for this incentive, development wouldn't happen in an area or in your town or whatever. So be conscious of that. You don't just have to give it away. In your scenario of somebody adding a garage onto their house, if they were going to do that anyway, you can look them in the face and tell them, no, we're not going to do a TIF agreement with you for that. You may not be happy about it, but they're not entitled to that money. They were going to build it anyway. Especially if they come to you after the fact. You're like, well, you didn't know you could get TIF until you came to talk to me. So use it to your advantage, because it's your money to spend, and it's your money to spend wisely to improve your town. And so those are our next two goals, that we invest in infrastructure. I don't know how many of you are involved in the day-to-day on infrastructure costs, but they're absolutely getting out of hand. we try and do the same amount of roads every year. I gave you that example. It's $2 million now. 4 years ago, it was $1 million to do the same length of road. I mean, it's literally doubled in the last 4 years. And that's true of everything from water line projects, sewer line projects, streets. It's just really costly to run the city. It's just the reality of it. And so having this there as a safety net, don't let it be your crutch, but as a safety net to, well, we've got a 100-foot line, we probably can't get to it for 3 or 4 years. You've got the money in TIF, get that project done. 'Cause that's gonna help however many people are hooked onto that water line, or whatever it may be. But again, it's a safety net for us. I don't rely on it every year for that kind of stuff, but I reserve some money in there, because it seems like every little project starts out at $40,000 now. Can't do anything for less than $40,000. Every water line replacement or repair is $40,000. I don't know, it's weird. So I try and keep a little money in those tips every year. I'm able to forecast and know what the deposit's gonna be every year from real estate tax. So I budget for that, and I budget how much I'm gonna have go out on what project, but I also have kind of a reserve fund there in case that something pops up that I didn't budget for. So there's two maps that look a lot alike, but the second one I zoomed in on. So the first one is the big, that's the citywide map. That's all of our TIFs that we have. And every color that's associated with it is a different TIF. Some are real small, which I'm not a fan of. Those were put in prior to this administration. I like the big ones. I like ruffling a lot of feathers when we do these things. 3,000 parcels, which is the yellow one in the bottom right-hand corner. That covers the oldest residential developments in town. Those were Marion's first neighborhoods over there. And those were the areas that we really quickly identified needed the most help, which is why we did what we did. The beautiful thing is that road running through there, and you may be able to see it a little better in the second picture, where it says Route 13, kind of on the right-hand side. There's one little L piece north of Route 13. Took a lot of flack for that one, including that in this TIF, but I'm glad we did. There's a 142 unit duplex development going in there, higher end. I think for the smallest unit, it's $1,000 a month. Most expensive unit, $1,600 a month. I don't know who's paying that, but they're full. And that project alone, like FedEx, is going to generate $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 a year in property tax that we can then spend everywhere in that area in yellow. And that's exactly what we did this year. This is the first year. I think I told you we put this in 2020, so it's 3 years old. We did a grant program this year in that yellow area where we set aside $200,000 and made grants to homeowners to make improvements to their home. So what we did was maximum of $5,000 grant, which would cover 75% of project costs. So if you did a $10,000 window replacement on your house, we pay for half of it. If you did a $7,500 window replacement on your house, we pay for 2/3 of it. We pay up to $5,000 on that program. We had that money set aside, $200,000, started May 1st. May 17th, I got my 48th application, and the money's all spent. And we're 2 months removed from that, 2.5 months removed from that. It generated a total investment in this yellow area of about $600,000 all total, between private investment and our 5,000 or whatever that number ended up being. That's why we wanted to do the residential TIF. We had this area, we knew a development was coming, so we captured that by putting that little L piece in that TIF. Knowing I could capture that, I can then spend that money and improve those older neighborhoods in town. This was the first year of it. We will do it every year now for the next 20. And if it generates anything like it did this year, we're gonna spend close to $10 million between the city's money and private investment in that area over the next 20 areas in town where these homes are 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 years old, and people are investing in them. What we realized, I went out late 2019, early 2020, before the pandemic, and was doing we had thought about this concept before we knew that little L-shaped development was coming, and needed to figure out what we could do to generate money in that area to help people fix up their homes. Because what we realized was the homes were owned by older folks that were on a fixed income. They didn't have $12,000 to put on a new roof. And their next stop was either a nursing home or worse. Either they didn't have kids, or if they did, the kids didn't want it, lived off somewhere else. And so what happens to those homes, as you probably all well know, is they go up for back taxes. And I don't know if you get the opportunity to deal with some of the same slumlords that we do.
I wish you'd get rid of them.
But they get bought up for pennies on the dollar,
Yeah.
and no improvements are made to them, and they're rented out for God only knows what. And no improvements are ever made to them, and the only difference is people are living in them, but they continue to deteriorate. So we felt like we needed something to interrupt that cycle. And so that's essentially when I was going door to door a little bit, asking about, what do you need in your neighborhood? I kept hearing things like, we need better streetlights, we need sidewalks in our neighborhood, and I found a lot of that. Sidewalks are in bad condition. The way our ordinance reads, as I'm sure yours does too, the developer's responsible for the sidewalks, and then the city gets the distinct pleasure of maintaining them for the remainder of eternity. Sidewalks are expensive. Concrete's expensive. Everything's expensive at this point. I've got a staff of 3 or 4 that we dedicate solely to sidewalks, unless there's a storm or something like that. On a good week, we can do that 4-man crew can knock out about a 300-foot stretch of sidewalk by themselves, about 100 yards in a week. That's it. I've got 8 miles of sidewalks that need to be replaced in Marion. I'm not going to make a dent in 20 years at this pace, but at least I have the money to do it without having to take general fund money, because I've got this TIF money in there. So we knock them out. We've talked about hiring contractors to do that work, and eventually we may get there. But 8 miles of sidewalks equates to about $13 million, if you're doing the math at home. So that yellow TIF area started generating what we were hoping it was going to generate. We did the grant program this year. I knew it was coming last year, and so we got aggressive, and when we heard FedEx was coming to town, we put in that red TIF district, which we call residential TIF 2. The yellow one's residential TIF 1. Again, I will offer the same incentive if FedEx comes, as I will if you're going to build a new home in that area. The difference is you're not going to generate as much tax as FedEx is, so I'm going to leverage their taxes to make improvements in that area. I think within 2 years.
And the red touches the yellow.
And the red touches the yellow. Yep. But again, like that little L piece on the yellow, that far piece on the left in red is where FedEx is. I hop the interstate with TIF in order to take in the second oldest neighborhood in Marion, which is everything else in red, the bigger block. They're kind of on the right side of it. So between the red and yellow, I cover almost everything south of Main Street, minus some of the stuff down there by the high school that's somewhat newer and not in need of any kind of redevelopment. But in the meantime, I've got 2 projects that are generating a ton of money that are ultimately going to benefit everyone else. And that's where this works really well. And that's why we did what we did. And so if you're thinking about the comment I heard earlier is we need people to rehab their homes, this is how you do it. In that yellow area alone to date, I've got 60 redevelopment agreements of just rehabs. Those are people that are buying the property for $30,000, they're putting 20, 25, 30 in it, they're selling it for 100, 120. Here's the beauty of it. I've got the agreement with them to do the work, and since it's a rehab, all of their investments covered by TIF. They're never going to make their full investment back. But they sell the house and continue to get the check. Because the agreement's with the buyer, the redeveloper, not the person that's gonna buy the house and live in it. So that's where this thing can get really interesting, and that's why, in my opinion, it's worked really well, because I've got 3 or 4 developers that go in and buy these homes. I sign an agreement with them on it, and they then turn around and sell it after they're done renovating it. They turn in all their costs to me, then they sell it. So the buyer, at that point, is paying the taxes every year for the next 20 years, and the developer, the person that originally made the investment in the home, is going to get 60% of the taxes back on that property in perpetuity for 20 years. Works really well, especially when that same developer buys up 10 or 15 more homes. Pretty soon, he's getting a check from the city every year for $15,000, which he's then turning around to go buy his next house.
And the person that bought it, they'd just be paying ordinary taxes.
Yeah, they're just paying their tax bill. Yes,
yeah.
absolutely. They're just paying their tax bill. They're none the wiser.
So the one is developing.
That's who I want to incentivize.
Yeah.
Because I want him to
Yeah.
go do that 10 or 15 or 20 or 100 more times, because it's working. And then young couples and whoever else are buying up those homes that are redone real nice, and they look like the house on HGTV that I just saw. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's what people want. And, you know, it's becoming a virtuous cycle rather than the vicious cycle of the homes getting bought up and by our favorite friends.
Can you tell me Redfield Drive and Iceland Drive out there is not in TIF district?
It's not in the city.
It's not considered in the city?
No, it's in the county.
It's still considered county?
Yep.
Well, maybe that might be a lot of reason why county's there so much.
Yeah, that's all county
The
over there.
$200,000 grant money, is that TIF money? Is that
Yeah, it's all TIF money. Yeah, it's all TIF money.
I have a really, probably dumb question.
No dumb questions.
You're sitting, I mean, we're sitting on a block here that
Yeah.
all but one lot on this block is tax exempt.
Yeah,
So no TIF money can be used here.
correct.
It has to be taxable property.
Correct. Yeah, because if it's not generating any tax, you have no tax of that to give away. You know what I mean? So that's a consideration too. There's no reason to cut this property, for example, out of the TIF district if you're gonna put a new one in, but it's not gonna get you any benefit either, unless the church sells, you know, whatever that may be.
For profit
Yeah.
company. comes in.
Absolutely, absolutely. The other thing with this, like the blue area in that TIF is our downtown. Like I talked about the residential grants, the city in the past has offered facade improvement grants for downtown. So you've got a bunch of awnings on your downtown, you can offer an awning grant. City will pay $5,000 towards a new awning for your business that's on the main drag. You can get creative with what you do on that stuff, but ultimately your goal is to encourage people to improve the outside look of the home, because that's gonna, rising tide lifts all boats, right? That's what the goal is. And so this grant that I talked about, it was for exterior improvements. So they had to put on window siding, landscaping, fences, whatever it may be. It wasn't replacing the furnace, which, again, it's its own issue. But that's not something the neighbors have to look at. Neighbors have to look at your deteriorating siding and your roof that's flaking off every time the wind blows. Yeah. So, again, you can get creative with that stuff. You can do a number of things, but it works both residentially and commercially. You just gotta get creative, figure out what your needs are. So, to your point, here's an example of a church in Marion that had long been abandoned. This is a couple blocks south of City Hall, along Everett and what I believe is Madison Street.
Yes.
And so this was known as the Border Street Baptist Church. 2018, you can see from the GIS map, it existed. There on the left picture, I'm on slide 11.
Yeah.
And I just noticed a misprint, that other picture that's 202, that was 2022, where that picture came from. Same picture, same area, same rectangle that you're looking at there, but you'll notice 5 houses, well, what is now 6, that weren't there before when the church was there. So in this scenario, the developer saw something that nobody else saw. He saw an old abandoned church, realized it could be 6 residential homes. So he tore down that church, put in 6 residential homes that are now generating, you can see this is a bad example because this isn't a full tax bill. I don't think I had a tax bill when I put this together, a full tax bill, but essentially these things are gonna generate $3,600 a year, and he's gonna get 60% of that times 6 homes for 20 years. It's a perfect project. So he saw a property that was abandoned church, full of crime, windows busted, drug activity in there, homeless people sleeping in there, whatever it was. And now has 6 spec homes there, all that are gonna be valued at about $120,000 to $140,000 a piece, about what he sold them for. And for the next 20 years, he's gonna get a check in the mail for all 6 of these, 6 different checks, for what, $2,400 a year.
So it's jury corporation, jury is CJ?
No, I'm on the slide before that.
Oh, okay.
That's another example. I'll share.
They're doing that with the old WGGH.
Yes,
That's right.
same thing, same concept. So that next tax bill, and I just wanted to show you what this can look like over time.
Yeah.
The way the tax bills are done in the county. So this is the Drury Inn Hotel in Marion. This was put in, again, this is in the first TIF district, which was put in '87, just prior to the Drury Inn being built. That's a $1.8 million, or almost $1.9 million building. It generates $133,488 a year in TIF 1 alone by itself. We generate a little over $3 million in TIF 1, which is in this year. And that's money that, again, but for the TIF, none of that development might have happened. And that's the argument. And that's how you combat your taxing bodies that may, and I imagine the only taxing body that may give you any fits is the school district in Johnston City, but I'll get into that.
Surveys more like every year though.
Yeah, exactly. Always do. Every school district. So the last example I'll share is the Applicability TIF. So before the golf course and all the residences out there were put in, the total land value of that area was $272,000. When that TIF ended in 2018, it was almost $16 million. Subdivisions alone are, from a developer standpoint, it's my opinion, it's the best use of TIF. So you've got a developer that's going in, buying a piece of ground, that's hopefully farmland, assessed real low in value. You're gonna do a TIF agreement with them. They're gonna put in the water line, the sewer line, and the road to your spec, whatever that may be, whether it's oil and ship or whatever else it may be. They're gonna put that in, and then they've got a decision to make. Do they wanna sell off lots around there, or do they wanna build the homes themselves and sell them off? If they build the homes themselves and sell them off, they're building it at a value that they're comfortable with. But each one of those lots, let's say it's 10 lots, okay? Each one of those lots, say you're gonna build $150,000, $200,000, $250,000 home on there, they're gonna generate $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 a year per home, right, in new real estate tax. So multiply that by 10, let's say that number's 50,000. I would give that developer 100%, at minimum 90% of the increment. Because what that's gonna do is gonna accelerate their payback, okay? So they're gonna have $300,000 or $400,000 in development costs by the time they put in the water line, the sewer line, the street. Obviously, that's subjective, that could change it, whatever it may be. But at $50,000 a year, they may get paid back in 10 years. I don't know. But the sooner they get paid back, the more willing that developer may be to go put in the next 7. I don't know.
So that's, you're talking about, that's like in raw land, like just open farmland?
Yeah,
A
yeah.
whole brand new stuff?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that is, obviously, you can make the case for commercial, generating a big number, but if you've got a developer that's like, where can I start? Finding a 4 or 5 acre tract of land that they can put 10 homes on is a great start to TIF. It's great for you, it's great for them.
Now that it's like Cocapelli,
Yeah,
they were probably paying $3,000 or $4,000 in taxes in '95, right?
Yeah.
Now they're possibly paying. Now the city will get the full amount. Now the TIF is expired, right?
the TIF's expired, so
Okay.
all that growth now goes back to the taxing bodies. So TIF locks in the value at where it is now. If you put a TIF in today, every property value, every tax dollar that's collected right now would continue to go to the taxing bodies as it does today. As things start to grow tomorrow, that stays in the city's coffers and the city's coffers alone for the 23-year period. So the taxing bodies are whole as of today for the next 23 years. They don't see any of the growth.
Yeah.
But the city collects that money, spends it, does whatever for 23 years, and then at year 24, when it goes back on the tax rolls,
They get the full
the
amount.
school district will get the new full amount.
Right.
Yeah.
So
An
if
incredible
the school
amount.
district is farsighted enough, they'll realize they're getting nothing out of that cornfield.
Absolutely.
Well, in that case, it was strip mine.
Absolutely.
Strip pits.
Yeah.
But now they get the full benefits of
100%.
Of Cocapelli plus the golf
100%.
course.
Yeah, they just have to be patient.
But that can go back, you can go back and request another 12 years, is that correct?
Absolutely. Yeah.
How's that work?
You have to get consent of all the taxing bodies. That's the only time you need consent. You can put in a TIF today and don't have to ask anybody's permission. You gotta go through the public hearing rigmarole, you gotta do all that kind of stuff. You don't have to get anybody to sign off on it. With an extension, you do.
How's that work? I mean, how do you apply for an extension?
You've gotta go through the legislature, they do that literally, Senator Fowler or, who's the rep here? Windhorse? Windhorse would have to carry that bill. Yeah. Yeah. But you do that at the end.
So the city, they do real well for the 20 years, then they really make a killing, right? If they developed it.
Well, you're keeping 100% of the growth for 23 years, and then you're gonna go back down to whatever your your tax.
But their taxes, if they develop the real nice
Yeah.
subdivision, will be through the roof.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but like you said, you keep all of it, none of it goes to the.
Other taxing bodies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it doesn't go to the other things, like. the-
They'll get what they get now.
Yeah, so you get all of it.
When it expires, the city will.
They're still getting their regular amount.
Yeah.
They'll still get, but they're still, it's gonna be developed, so they're gonna, that's added.
The
Yeah.
city really can't lose them, right?
No.
In my opinion, they can, as long as you're judicious with what you do with the tax money. If the city's stupid with it, then you're gonna get more
They
pitchforks
do
after.
real well while it's in place, and
Yeah.
when it expires, they do great.
Well, I'm of the school of thought that if you spend the money smartly, you'll start making more friends than enemies with it, right? If you're doing the things that people see, if you're putting in sidewalks, the things that people like, I wanna walk in my neighborhood. I'm sure a lot of your neighbors do. They want sidewalks to do that. Those are the things, and I use the sidewalk example a lot because it's very visible. You can see it. You can see when one's buckled, you can see a new one. There's a difference there.
Question, okay. Let's say you don't get your 12-year extension. Could you, because just north of Cocapelli, the housing,
Yeah,
we're back to cornfields.
yeah,
Can you make any TIF there?
as long as it qualifies, yes.
And extend the city limits north?
Yeah, so that's the thing, it's gotta be in the city limits.
Okay, yeah.
It's gotta qualify, so just farmland in the loan probably wouldn't qualify. It's gotta have one of those other stipulations like it's been under.
Can you back up, let's say, can you back up, let's say to 13 and the TIF that just ended, make that a new TIF goal?
Parts of it, but you're gonna have a hard time arguing that
I know.
it's 35 years or older if most of the growth has happened in that 35-year
Okay,
period.
I just want.
Yeah, you can do that. You can, once one expires, you can put one back in its place. Say you had a TIF district that covered one lot and didn't develop in 23 years, it expired, you could put a new TIF district in on that one lot
Okay.
in year 24. But definition of insanity is,
I know, doing something
yeah, yeah.
over and over and
Yeah.
expect a different result.
Yeah. We're getting close to an hour, so I'll try and wrap up. I'm sorry, I could talk about this stuff all night.
Listen on that.
So,
This is cool.
I've already talked about,
I
I've already talked about a lot of this. Grants, obviously, I've talked quite a bit about grants, whether that's facade improvement grants or whether that's home improvement grants, whatever that may be. Loans are another thing you can do. We've done this on a couple of occasions. Some of these older buildings in downtown Marion that are currently being renovated, they need all the help they can get. There's been a couple of scenarios where the building probably should have been torn down, but the developer had a will to save it. But the banks are also smart, they're only gonna give somebody so much money. And so the city will come through with a loan, and you can do that at no interest, you can do that at 1%, you can set the interest rate on that, and you can loan those funds out of TIF. So if you had somebody that was, I wanna do this project, but I'm $25,000 away, I need the cash, you could technically loan this against them, make that their agreement, and before they get any money back, they have to pay back that loan first or something like that. So you can get creative on loans too. And then we don't do this, but I've heard of some communities that do down payment assistance to attract new residents or new small business owners or something like that, where you can just give them, again, kind of a grant. But you can stipulate it however you want. They have to, you get $1,000 for every kid you enroll in the school system. You get, you could, any number of things you could use as qualifiers for these things. So it's all about how creative you want to get and really how much money you have to play with. And then lastly, the part that nobody wants to talk about is the challenges.
We got a lot of them.
There's a lot of things, obviously TIF is complex. Marion's had TIF for 35 years. I have people to this day. I have city council members. I tried my darndest to understand that.
I know city council members that understand it.
Yeah, it's the nature of government, I get it. People think they're being bamboozled by something just inherently. Yeah, and
Thank you.
we've all seen that, like, what was it, Franklin County, they tried for 4 or 5 election cycles to pass a tax referendum so they could build a new courthouse. And the art got voted down every time, because people said they didn't trust the council, or didn't trust the county board. You hear that with school districts a lot on the 1% sales tax. So I can't answer that question for you, how you build a level of trust with the community.
By looking at Marion.
Yeah, well,
It's right there.
Yeah. But again, I've got people that don't trust what we're doing.
Well, I know
So,
we do too. It's obvious.
I talked a little bit about the taxing body's pushback again. School districts really the only people that are ever engaged us in any conversations. Airport never comes, the county never comes, nobody ever comes to these things. We have to do an annual meeting, as you guys probably do too, with your it's called the joint review board, just kind of review the state of the current TIF, how many agreements are there, what it's generating every year, blah, blah, blah. The school district's the only group that comes to that.
We've never had that.
Never ever had,
Okay.
had Johnston ever had.
May not be doing it correctly.
Probably not.
The public pushback, going back to the map, the yellow district that we put in was first. Every question that we got from the public on that was, does that mean you're gonna tear down my neighbor's house and build a CVS?
Yeah.
There was a lot of concerns that I personally didn't understand. I guess because people associate TIF with commercial development, just naturally. Obviously, that wasn't our intention. Our intention was for somebody to buy your neighbor's house, fix it up, and
Raise your property.
yeah, absolutely. But we always get asked the question, is this a new tax? Does this make my taxes go up? The answer to all those things is no, it's not a new tax. And if your taxes go up, unfortunately, they probably go up every year, but it's because we're making improvements in your neighborhood, which is our intention. don't hide it, that's your intention. It's not gonna intentionally make your taxes go up, but if there's enough, I was gonna say organic development, but it's really inorganic, because you're investing in this. If there's enough inorganic development in that area, people are gonna fix their homes up, pretty soon, property levels are gonna rise, which means property taxes are gonna go up. I don't hope your taxes go up.
But their assessed
Each
value is
person.
gonna go up, the value of their home.
Absolutely,
Exactly.
but and that's the other, it's a very frustrating conversation with people, because they're like, well, if you put a CVS in next to my house, my property value is gonna tank. I'm like, well, which is it? Do you want your property taxes to go up, or at least maintain their current level, or do you want them to go, I don't understand what you're wanting. So the whole not in my backyard, I put it on there as an NB, my favorite government acronym, not in my backyard. That was, everyone in the yellow was really arguing against it, because one, it was a new tax, which is not true. And two, it was because I know what they're up to. They're gonna put a CVS in next to my house on Otis Street, Marion.
Nobody wants a commercial
Absolutely,
property near the
absolutely.
house, that's why.
So, overcome the commercial and residential argument, you can do that. Commercial areas are for commercial development, residential areas are for residential development, and we can incentivize them like that. When we put the red TIF in, it was the weirdest thing. Everyone was asking about, does this mean you're gonna buy my house? Eminent domain. And I don't know if that was because of the Midway Court project, Midway Concord project that we were undertaking, or what, but everybody assumed we were gonna buy their house and put in a CVS, not their neighbors anymore.
I don't know why they said it, because, traffic does not flow in those areas.
No, it doesn't. And the fact that we included FedEx and they're doing all this work on the interstate for that new overpass, people assumed we were getting an interchange there, and that we were gonna tear down half that neighborhood and put in UPS, which is just not the case. But people will dream up and imagine monsters under the bed. That's just human nature. That's what they do. And then the last thing that we heard that people are absolutely offended by is this concept of blight, which is a qualifier of TIF. Blight is defined, as I told you earlier, blight is defined in many ways. The two easiest to qualify for are that it's been undermined. You can build a brand new $1 million home on a piece of ground that's undermined, your house is blighted, according to the state. You don't have to like it.
7 coal mines on the perimeter of this
Absolutely.
town, one in
Absolutely.
every corner, so the
Yeah.
whole town.
Use it to your advantage.
Yeah.
Or if you're, again, you could have a $1 million home that you just renovated last year, but it was built 42 years ago, it's older than 35 years, it's automatically blighted. I don't care how much money you spent on it last year. So people are offended that we call it. I know, I agree. The people are automatically offended because you're using the word blight associated with their house. But that's just how the state defines it. So, I think that's it.
Let me ask you a question.
Yeah,
This is gonna, okay, as a planning commission,
yeah.
what's our role with it?
It's a great question. We don't have a planning commission.
Get stuff done. We can't get anything done, and we got.
But you have forward thinking people.
Yeah, so technically in the books, we have a planning commission. In practice, we don't have a planning commission.
We just haven't given up.
So as far as, I don't know, I guess my best answer would be, talk to the city council and encourage them to look at stuff like this. I mean, how often do you guys have people in front of you at planning commission meetings?
You mean city council?
No,
Just
people in here with projects.
We should let every other month.
You mean people, developers come
Yeah.
in?
Developers.
We haven't. I
Yes,
think we had
yeah,
one.
at the very beginning.
We had Spiller,
We
didn't we?
had
Rob Spiller,
We had
yeah.
Rob wanted to do the subdivision, and we had the gentleman that wanted to put the senior citizens.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's been a while back.
That was back in 2013.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Well,
What I'm hearing-
consolation, he never got it.
What I'm hearing is you can think of two examples.
Yeah, right.
You guys should have a monthly meeting. Are you scheduled monthly or?
We are.
Yes.
We
Okay.
are. And we tell
Uh,
people it's open to the public,
yeah.
and tell them that we're available, and
Yeah. Well, so like our zoning board, for example, they only meet as needed. They don't meet monthly on a given
We don't have a
schedule.
zoning board.
Well, so we're comfortable with
Kind of both, okay.
We proposed the zoning and the city council ignored it. I mean,
Yeah.
in X.
Yeah.
Yeah, so have you guys put together, or is one of your roles charged with putting together a comprehensive plan?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
and
Have
we've
you done that?
They tried.
Well, we tried.
Okay.
We wanted to rezone our city.
Business.
Yeah.
Because we have four zones, and we really don't need four.
Oh, that's different, that's the
That's the-
ward district.
The wards,
boundary.
Oh,
sorry.
the wards, yeah.
We did rezone it.
Well,
too
we
in
proposed a
2013.
new business zones like
District.
down Broadway and down.
So we
down
can
that.
extend it.
Yeah,
But we wanted to redo the wards, because we have two small ones and two large ones.
yeah,
We wanted to break it down to 3 wards,
And make them equal.
yeah.
to make them equal.
You think we should have a comprehensive, this board develop a comprehensive development plan for the
I think
city?
you should.
Well, that's in ordinance, that's what we're supposed to be doing.
Yeah,
Right.
we have.
Or what you were supposed to be doing. I'm the
Yeah.
former chairman, resigned.
If I were you, that's what I would do,
Okay.
and then go, all of you go to the city
Do like
council
a-
meeting
Do
once.
like a list of what we'd like to propose for the city?
Yeah, and show examples of why.
Okay.
So-and-so does this and it works great. This
Okay.
town does this, and this is why they do it, we talk to them, and it works great. You know, and use the stuff like property values are stagnant. I'm sure they are. That's
Yeah.
another qualifying, that's another
They're not just
definition
stagnant,
of
they're probably declining because all these houses are getting torn down.
Period.
which
Right.
is a qualifier for
Well,
TIF.
yeah, no,
That's another
they're
one.
not bad, are they?
So,
Ours are pretty,
I think you have me here because you know there's an argument to be made there.
We're either moving forward or we're moving backwards.
Yeah.
We need to move forward.
Well, I told everybody, Johnston's last frontier in Lincoln County.
Yeah,
It is,
yeah.
it honestly is.
You either gotta go forward, you're.
Well, and
yeah.
I know Megan Rich a little bit, and I've watched what she's been doing with that building downtown.
Yes, yes.
Figure out how to capture that.
Yeah.
Who's the next Megan Rich?
We need-
Who's the
we
next
have
person
to-
that's gonna take up a building like that, and do what she's doing to it?
How do you deal with property owners that won't let things go for a reasonable price?
Yes, we have one that the building's
They just would rather the
empty
building
and-
just sit there empty and rot.
Talk about commercial.
Yes, commercial.
Well, and it's probably.
We've had two of
Built
them.
it properly.
He's on 2 of them,
Well-
and he refused to sell it for a lesser value, and it's just sitting there empty still, yet he finally did sell it,
So,
and it's not usable.
if you have TIF, participate with the buyer, try and be closer to his
How
price.
does the buyer sign up with it? Okay.
I'm not saying that's the be-all, end-all, but that's a strategy.
Yeah.
Um,
Tell them what's available.
Or does it need condemned?
No, it's not in bad shape yet, but it will be.
Yeah, it will be if it just
Well,
sits.
it's molded.
So, one of your,
I heard it's molded. It's
Here's-
very nice on the side.
here's an idea that I'm trying to get going in town.
What?
Having a abandoned property registry.
Having what?
Abandoned
Yeah,
property
yeah, I've
registry.
been wanting, that's something, hey, guys, write this down, is what you just said. That's what we need to do. That was one of the visions I had, to get a list of abandoned properties, of properties that, you know, even
Yeah.
the city-owned properties, we can't figure out, I mean, the city doesn't
We
own
had
all
no
the
clue
property.
who owns,
Yeah,
what city owns it,
so,
we don't
so,
know.
again, if people aren't voluntarily doing something, force them to do it. So create a vacant property registry.
Don't take no for an answer.
Charge them $50 a year to register, and they have to do it every year by this date, whatever date that is. And if they don't, they're out of compliance.
So I own the lot next to my house.
Yeah.
I bought the house and tore it down.
Vacant
I
building,
have-
vacant building,
That's different.
vacant building
It's not
registry.
lots, vacant.
This is
So
how.
I don't have to pay the $50?
No, I'm talking about
Lots.
vacant building registry.
Oh, okay.
Buildings that are-
Vacant building, not vacant, actually.
Right,
places of
sorry,
land.
sorry, yeah.
It's a joint, you
Okay.
probably.
Your lot's not
Basically
causing any
talking
issues.
commercial or
Like
like
if
a
you
residential, but.
Okay, like if you would've left that building on there and it would've been vacant and it started deteriorating.
Yeah.
And you might have to.
Yeah,
Right,
a
right.
vacant lot's not causing any issues, a vacant
No.
building's probably
Right,
causing
yeah.
a lot
I'm
of
not
issues.
going
Yeah,
nuts over there.
yeah.
We're condemning these houses, then we tear them down, then they have to pay to keep it molded.
Yeah.
And the city and the school district is just losing revenue all the time, and enrollment.
Yeah, the best thing we did, So when I started with the city in 2019, one of the first things I did was look at what we were spending on attorney's fees for the stuff that you were talking about.
Yeah.
We were spending roughly $150,000 a year. We hired a city attorney for 85. Best move we ever made. Absolute best move we ever made.
Unfortunately, our town can't afford that.
Well, look at what you're spending. I know, I'm just saying, look at what you're,
That might be more than we think it is.
it may be, and you may be able to get an attorney for $60,000.
We can't even keep an attorney, let alone.
I understand, but,
But Marion had all these problems at one point, didn't they?
well, we still do, but we're slowly tackling.
What are you doing, or what do you suggest we do about the slumlord problem?
Do you have a building inspector or anything?
Yeah, well, kind of.
Well,
Kinda.
yeah.
Okay.
That's not stopping much, though.
No,
It looks to me like the yellow TIF district could solve most of these problems, right?
well, it's gonna encourage people to invest, and that's not what they wanna do. They don't wanna invest in anything. So, they also don't wanna sell anything, at least to us. Same house they bought for $2,500, that's 900 square feet, they'll quote us $300,000 on. Anytime we try to buy one from them. There's no good answer to that. One thing we did was create a rental inspection program
Yeah.
for our building person. And that's really seemed to help quite a bit. And in order to get the water turned on,
Well, that doesn't stop them from renting.
well,
Believe me, it don't, they still rent it, and those people don't have water.
But what he's saying, we can
Yeah.
write it up,
So-
close it to them.
what we did, because they were doing a lot of contract for deeds,
Yeah.
Yeah.
predatory contract for deeds.
Yes.
So they would take
Predatory
your,
loans.
they would take your $1,000 deposit, knowing that you couldn't pay 2 months, $500 rent. And by month 3, they'd have $2,000 out of you, and would
Well, if it's the same one
evict you.
we have, which is the Beckers.
Yeah. So what we required them to do is to record the contract for deed before we'll turn the water on. I have to have a recorded copy, or I have to have a signed copy by both parties of a lease and an occupancy permit in the house before we'll turn water on.
Right.
If they don't have water, we'll give them 10 days notice, and then we'll take a report.
There are
Take
homes
the
that's
owner
got
record?
water.
Yeah, take a report.
Take the owner report.
Yes.
If the house is occupied without water.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah,
Our biggest issue, honestly, is our city council.
yeah,
It seriously is.
yeah.
I mean, we have the one, like I started saying about the boards, where we're trying to redo the boards. We had a city councilman pop up and said, well, if it was good enough for 1889, it's good enough now.
Yeah.
It was dead in the water. They didn't even vote on it. Because he
You
said
do
that.
have a mayor that's trying.
Yeah.
He is.
And here, if you just get him and 1 or 2 other votes, the other people follow suit.
Yeah.
So it can be done.
I understand.
We do finally have a grant writer, and, which is Shane Herman's. This is the
Pearl.
list.
Yeah, he does, Murphy.
This is the list that the city has to do before we can get a single grant.
Yeah. I know.
But we just got a water tower grant, so we probably need this ones, but.
Yeah,
We need a sewer grant.
yeah. No, I know.
We can't do anything until we can get the city.
I can't answer the city council.
We're working on that. Doug's
We're
trying.
trying.
You know, have a one-off with each of them. Or
Yeah,
find somebody to run against it. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's the,
We can't get anybody to run.
yeah, that's our
It's all
biggest issue.
appointed.
Yeah.
We have probably 4 appointed councilmen now.
Yeah, we cannot get anybody to run in this town.
Yeah.
It's just stuff we're gonna have to deal with.
Well, and go talk to people about it. See if Megan Rich will run for city council. See if people that are investing in your town will run for city council, because I guarantee you they'll have a different mindset.
Yeah.
Do the old fashioned door to door, send out a letter.
We do it, the younger generation does seem to be open to these ideas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
it seems.
Yeah.
For people my age, like, oh, no.
But at the end of the day, TIF doesn't cost the residents anything.
You know.
If it works well, it's gonna cost them future tax dollars. But they're not gonna be here if there's nothing to be here for.
Yeah.
That's
Plus they'll be able to sell their property for a lot more.
And if, yeah.
It's
if
in a better neighborhood.
If neighbors on both sides of their homes have busted windows and they're whatever, they're not gonna live here anyway.
Old,
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Put those towns sharing.
Our housing is our biggest issue, to be honest with you right now, because of housing does not maintain.
Yeah.
Last year in July, I had meth lab go up across the street from me in housing,
Public housing.
Yeah.
public housing.
I know.
That's how you, the housing is not taken care of. When I moved in that same housing 30 years ago,
Yeah.
and there was these big requirements you had to move in there, and it's like it doesn't apply anymore.
Yeah. Well, everybody's understaffed, everybody's overworked, and in order to get the council or whoever to get behind this, you need people in your corner arguing for it, and the reasons why.
Do you see any reason, like you said, that yellow TIF district,
Yeah.
why Johnston City could develop
I see no
something?
reason.
Because that really describes our town.
I see no reason.
We have two interstates.
Yeah,
We have 57 and 37.
I know,
Like 13.
I know.
But ever since I've lived here, it's never been,
A priority.
no, they don't think that if you have a business, you're gonna do local business.
Yeah,
Well, my business, I do local and I pull off the interstate.
yeah,
And I see how many people, and when they come to town, this is a cute town.
Absolutely.
A lot of them stay out at Arrowhead Lake, they love it, they want to, all
Absolutely.
this is really
Yeah.
nice. And I imagine a lot of them come back to retire here.
Yeah.
Because they're out of Chicago and St. Louis.
Absolutely.
So,
Such a great value.
absolutely, yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
that's true of all of Southern.
We just had a guy,
Values.
Every
you
town
know,
around
Market
is
Street
facing
from
some
Las
same
Vegas.
issues we are. We just gotta do
He
something.
could not believe the.
And that's all we're doing, we're trying.
Yeah.
We did all this at the
Yeah.
onset, not knowing if it would work.
Mayor Butler, he had foresight, he could see.
Absolutely, guy could see around the corner
All the
better.
rest of these towns didn't have a Mayor Butler,
Yeah.
and that's the difference.
Yeah,
And he took a lot of slack,
Yeah, he did.
oh, absolutely.
you know, but that didn't stop him, that was what
But
was.
I get it, I know what it's like when you guys lose heart and don't wanna do it anymore and that kind of stuff. But if you're not out there recruiting people to sing your song, it's never gonna happen. So, that's my best advice to you, find people that,
The city council is who we have to have in our pocket, not pocket, but in on our side more than anybody.
find people that'll bend your ear beyond what's in this room. That's my advice to you.
We don't even know who all the city council members are anymore because it's just.
Thank you for coming up, Cody,
Absolutely.
and taking time out of your day.
Super.
Happy to help.